So today, good people on both sides of the difficult forestry issue have come together with me to bring jobs and a healthier tomorrow to 8.3 million acres of federal forest land in eastern and central Oregon. Today, for the first time in memory, timber executives are standing shoulder to shoulder with leaders of the Oregon environmental community to take shared responsibility for protecting and saving our endangered forest. The proposal that we bring forward today, which will be introduced as formal legislation shortly, will provide an immediate supply of logs in the short term to jumpstart restoration efforts and keep our mills alive. I think these good folks from around Oregon have demonstrated something that my colleagues in the United States Senate could learn from. And that's working together on a difficult issue is not only possible, it yields a lot more productive results than working apart.
You know, enactment of this legislation will result in new rules of engagement for the conservation community, the timber industry, and other stakeholder interests in the management of Oregon's east side forests. Confrontation will give way to collaboration. Walking and talking in the woods will become more prevalent than litigating and arguing in courts. However, it won't be a cakewalk. Historic distrust is not overcome by merely the introduction or enactment of legislation. The times and the east side forests require that both the conservation community and the timber industry reinvent themselves. And Senator Wyden's introduction of this path-breaking legislation is an important milestone in those efforts. You know, in closing, I want to say that I consulted with my constituents about this legislation. In particular, constituents that I consulted included the salmon, the steelhead, the bull trout, the blackback woodpecker, the white-headed woodpecker, the brown creeper, the beaver, and elk and bighorn sheep. Couldn't check with all the species, but all those species says that the Oregon East Side Forest Restoration, Old Growth Protection, and Jobs Act is a good idea.
But this does set a framework for a new type of collaborative, cooperative activity amongst the former warring factions that will give the 150 families that our company employs directly or indirectly a sense that perhaps they'll have a job to go to tomorrow morning and next year and the year after that.
I want to say, in order for this legislation to work, it's going to take all of us that are standing up here today in coordination to make sure that we all see this as a positive step, that the hang-ups that we used to have in the past with some of the litigation, with some of the uncertainties, we put that behind us. We get these projects implemented on the ground, we make the forest healthy, we make the industry healthy, and we make our communities healthy.
I mean, after months of negotiations with the timber industry and some of the conservation groups, the conservation community, we found this common ground that people have been speaking about. Senator Ron Wyden, thank you, Ron, brought us together on a proposal to permanently protect our remaining old-growth forests in eastern Oregon while producing timber and green jobs for rural communities. And that's by doing this ecological, science-based forest restoration. If you told me 10 years ago that Oregon Wild and the timber industry would one day share a podium supporting the same forest legislation, I would have said, you are absolutely crazy. There's no way in hell that would happen. But here we are. We're here together today. And I think that the conservationists and timber industry, we do have a long way to go. There's still a lot of work to be done. I kind of like to think there's going to be a lot of boots wore out on the ground before this thing is finished and before we get the job done to try to help start restoring these forests. But anyway, working together to enact this legislation, I believe, is the first step. Do this forest restoration so conservation groups and timber industry can leave a legacy of wild forests, wildlife, clean water, and a good quality of life in Oregon for generations to come.
It was coming together, bringing goodwill to the table, and that's critical in a discussion of this type. That goodwill needs to be there in order for the old habits, the old inclinations and prejudices not to take a hold at some point. And it could have, under different circumstances, those old habits could have scuttled an activity such as we've been involved with for the last year and a half. But the stakes were too large. and
Over
that is-
time, there's been a maturing of the ecological science that deals with forests and forest management. And what we've seen on the east side of the Cascades is it is showing us that there are lots and lots of acres out there that have been changed by our past management, and that indeed the science has shown to restore those forests on some of the drier ponderosa pine type forests, you can do active management. And that was one of the things that said, okay, hey, maybe this is a different ball game than what we've seen before, so let's use the science and what it says to actually restore these to more old growth, more fire resistant, more insect resistant forests.
I think that certainly in the last year or year and a half, the period of these negotiations, I think Oregonians have come to see natural resources policy where we want a win-win. We want good paying jobs as a result of a natural resources based economy, and we want to protect our treasures. That's what we've wanted. In the last year or year and a half, I think what people have seen is that business as usual produced, instead of the win-win, a lose-lose. You wouldn't get the jobs that are so desperately needed in hard-hit rural areas, nor would you do what was necessary to protect our treasures. So I have seen that kind of sense emerge in the last year to year and a half in a very concrete way. I mean, people will just come up and tell me that. Can't we figure out a way to break this gridlock? And the reality is that this has gone on for years and years. Senator Hatfield, who for me will always be our senior senator. I mean, he did so much for our state, spent so many years trying to bring people together, and yet years later we would be back in the same place. The same conflicts would emerge at a time when Oregonians want this win-win. We'd be sitting there just as we characterized, where everybody had just enough strength to block the other guy, but not enough goodwill and ability to allow us to achieve what Oregonians want, which is economic prosperity and protecting these wonderful treasures.